became very famous with barbecue. Now, every Saturday specifically, they would come from all over to buy barbecue. His little pit was out there in the backyard, actually, across the road. This way. There's an artesian well here. There's two of them in Bemis. The drinking fountain was right here, almost where this sign is now, with artesian water. This well is still here. It furnished the water for the livestock as well as the school itself. We're going to cross the creek again. As a matter of fact, if you can see right straight in front of us where the road splits, there's a concrete block there. That's the aqueduct actually coming from the dam. These were cow pastures. Can't see much of it anymore, but through the woods toward the tank are the cooling ponds for the mill itself. The water, of course, coming out of the mill was hot, and they would put it off in the cooling ponds and then pump it back into what we call the mill pond itself. We're right behind the mill. You can see it from here. A lot of fishing. The swimming pool is in there. Bemis had a swimming pool, really a wading pool. Matter of fact, there were 3 pools in Bemis. The main swimming pool was there. Here's the aqueduct right here. It's still functional.
Where is the cemetery?
It was right up on the hill from where we just left. If we'd have followed that road around behind the church, it would have gone right up to the cemetery. It is still active.
My mother was buried there 2 years ago.
Is that right? It's well kept. It's very well kept. Albert Falwell, Bemis, I mentioned, had 2 friends at MIT with him. One of them was a landscape architect. He became very famous and did a lot of the architectural and landscaping architect in Washington, D.C. Albert Falwell actually wrote an entire thing for the Congress on building towns and housing. And then there is a department at MIT that was put there in memory of Judson Moss. Let's go this way. Where we're looking at now, those warehouses, that was the YMCA. And it had a great big skating rink in the back of it. And there were bus routes coming from Jackson every hour, and bus stops all over Bemis. And the skating rink became so famous that at night all these buses would be loaded coming out of Jackson to go to the skating rink in Bemis, because it was the only one, of course, in the whole area. And the second gymnasium was there, and then the WCA, the Women's YMCA, was there. And a lot of activity for children was done in that. And next to it was the YMCA. And it was built pretty close to the time that Bemis was built. And everybody played checkers in there. It had all these checker tables and pool halls and all. And it had showers and all in it. So if you left the shift at the mill and wanted to go to the Y to take a shower, you could do that. And it was a lot of activity in the YMCA. The band room was there, and the Bemis band practiced there until my time, and I became the drum major of the band, and we practiced in the fire station, so we had the fire trucks and the band room with us. Willie Butler's daddy drove the buggy from Surrey for Mr. Young, and so Willie actually grew up here all of his life, actually. The Youngs lived on top of the hill. We're going toward that house right now. Just go all the way up to the top of the hill. These are some of the oldest houses in town. But even today, the city of Jackson, of course, Bemis is in the city of Jackson now, part of the city itself. But they still keep up a lot of the landscaping. You can see all these dogwoods that are in this midsection of this street. The mayor is very helpful to us. His name is Jerry Guest, and he was the park director before he became the mayor. And the bus you're riding on today is compliments of the mayor. So you're riding compliments of the mayor guest. The management of the mill, most of them lived up on the top of the hill where we're coming now. The Young's house was here, Mr. J.V. Young, and when we get to it, it's one of the largest houses in town, and I'm not real certain of this, but it became the parsonage for the Methodist Church, and it still may be the parsonage for the church. But the story is that every afternoon when he would come from the mill office, he would sit on a little balcony, and I think that balcony is still there. Yeah, I see it's on top of the porch. And have a little drink and survey the town. That's the house that the Youngs lived in. And then his son Fred Young lived in the next house that's behind that. And then the next one was what we all call Bubba. He was the third generation of the Youngs that managed the mill itself. We're going to turn up here and go back over to that. Yes, it's the street's going in. The houses are extremely well built. They're built out of some of the finest lumber, most of it virgin lumber for this area, and they certainly have been kept in excellent condition, but they're all privately owned now. When we turn the corner going across, there are 3 or 4 small houses that are here together in a group. They really were the servants for these houses. Yes.
Bicycle Hill.
Yep, that's Bicycle Hill. We'd all come up and ride down the hill. That was a big deal. The house on the left-hand side on the corner was Mr. Joe Woodson's house. His wife was our English teacher, and she wore purple all the time, and we called her the Purple Flash because she was always dressed in purple. She was a pretty good singer and songwriter, and she wrote a song one time, and it was entitled The Purple Flash. So, Mr. Joe Woodson. You can see all the wood sheds, and of course they got that name because they stored the wood in them for the winter. A little later on, when coal, and most of these houses had coal fireplaces in them, really. And the coal wagon would deliver the coal and put it in the woodshed, actually. The railroad track was right in front of us, where you see that line of trees. That was the main line coming out of Jackson. And the depot was right up here, and you could go back and forth to Jackson on the train. And the early workers, that's exactly what they did. The town, by now you realize, was built in sections, actually. The section in front of the mill, and then the section that we see now, and then what's called Silver Circle, we're fixing to go by it, and then Newtown, where we left earlier. So that was the different sections of the town. We're coming in the downtown business district. And the old company store is here, and you could buy everything there. They didn't just sell, but not like any kid would have seen today. The clerk stood behind the counter, and you really went in and told them what you wanted, and they got it off the shelves and fixed it for you. And they had a vacuum system with little tubes, and they would put the tickets in there, and it would suck it up to the mezzanine of the company store, and the bookkeepers were all up there, and then they would send it back down. And so as kids, we really watched to do that. We'd buy a penny's worth of candy just to make them do that so we could watch that. Dr. Kelly Smith was the first doctor in Bemis, and Dr. Smith lived right across on the right side in that corner house. And he had his office over the company store. And even when they built the new mill office, they put a clinic up there large enough to actually do surgery. But Dr. Kelly didn't like that, and he practiced most of the time in the company store upstairs. And I broke my arm lawn mowing, and my grandmother, of course, brought me. Dr. Smith said it, and he put a cast on it. He was kind of a grumpy old fella. Get right up here and stop. Okay. And so he got on to me, and he told me not to mow till that healed. Well, I made my money mowing, you know, so I couldn't give up my clientele. So I went back to mowing, and I broke the cast. So here comes my grandmother bringing me back to Dr. Smith. And so we get up there, and he's fooling with my arm. He took the cast off, and he had both hands just fooling with it, and all of a sudden he broke it again because it was setting wrong. It wasn't setting to suit him. And of course I wasn't even prepared for that. And he said, I'm going to put a cast on it. Now go back to mowing the yards again. Of course I didn't do that anymore. But his office, as you went up those steep steps to get to his office, actually. The post office is there, and it's still there. That's the post office. And next to it was the drugstore. That was West Drugstore. And then next to it is the new clinic, and in behind it was the shoe shop. And so you could bring all of your shoes to the shoe shop and get them fixed all the time. And that was a fascinating day to go and watch all the shoe repair that was in there. The train station was right here where we are. Literally, this circle went around to the train station. And then later on, that was the tennis courts that we're looking at in front of us. And Bemis made a little park out of it, and they hired Miss Stella Duncan to run the park. And so we could all come up here, and Miss Stella always had arts and craft and things like that for us. And I mentioned that I was a drum major, so Miss Stella helped me make a little lariat for my whistle. And it's in the museum, but that would have been 50-something years ago. But she took some, I don't know what she took, but she made it out of something anyhow. But it's lasted all those years. Right on time. The theater has an underground tunnel that goes from it to the mill. And of course the steam was piped through that. You can walk through it actually. And I never had realized this, but the theater was always cool. And the reason they had great big fans in that tunnel, and it pulled that cool air and pushed it into the theater itself. And in the basement of the theater, there's a complete vacuum cleaner system. And there were little holes in the floor, and you swept the popcorn over in there, and the vacuum system pulled it down into the basement of the theater. The Methodist church, and we didn't go by it, but it's right across there, it was heated by steam from the mill also. And right up here beside this building was the cotton grading office. And I told you that I worked for the company too, but I worked in the cotton grading office and learned to grade cotton actually. And as I mentioned, they bought cotton. They even bought cotton from Egypt. Some of the finest cotton grown in the world is grown in Egypt. And the Bemis company would buy that, and they would resell it a lot of times. They watched the stock market from this little building, and if prices went up beyond what they were paying for it, they would sell it on the open market. The gin originally was in the yard of the mill itself, and now it's back over here. There are only 2 gins left in Madison County, and one is at Mercer, Tennessee, and one is here in Bemis. That's the only 2 left. But there's a vast difference. These 2 gins can gin a bale of cotton every 3 minutes. And in the old days, it was an all-day affair to go to the cotton gin, you know, so. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little ride around Bemis. Go home and read your history book. Thank you for coming, really. That's the paint shop. You remember I mentioned that Bemis painted every house every 5 years, and the carpentry and paint shops were there, and they made arrangements each year or whatever the time frame was to come, and they'd bring a color chart, and the houses were always white except the trim work. In the early days they were trimmed out in colors, but other than that all the houses in Bemis were painted white.
Is it possible maybe they're going to save the office building?
The office building is not set to be destroyed or deconstructed, nor is the platform warehouses that you see there, and then one of the other buildings that's in the back is not. This guy owns the mill itself and part of the back of the mill, which was put on much later. And then he owns the 2 water towers also, and the smokestack tower is his. But those buildings that we see in the warehouses are not his, and then the warehouses next to that belong to the gin. And so of course that's where they store all of their cotton that they're buying now. So
is the office in the historical?
Yes, it is. And the other one is the second office, and it's the newer of the two. So
I can back out and get out of here and take that money